Alright, so I've seen a few videos about this and some blog posts, and pretty much nobody asked for this, and I can barely edit, but here we go. So, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is my favorite show of all time, and I've been watching it since I was a kid, so when I was a little bit older and I started watching the Vampire Diaries, I realized quite a few similarities. When I looked it up, I realized I wasn't the only one who realized this, but it's not necessarily hard to miss. Buffy the Vampire Slayer premiered in 1997 and ran until 2003. It starred Sarah Michelle Gellar as Buffy Summers and ran for 7 seasons, gaining a cult following. It was pretty much the epitome of late 90s, early 2000s TV, and it followed the Monster of the Week format. The Vampire Diaries ran from 2009 to 2017 for 8 seasons. Where Buffy is campy and fun, The Vampire Diaries is brooding and melodramatic. It was on the CW after all. It was based on a series of books by L.J. Smith. The show stars Nina Dobrev as Elena. It shows her life as an average teenage girl and her weird love triangle between vampire brothers Stefan and Damon. Very dramatic stuff. Alright, so let's get into it. There are quite a few comparisons, and while it's easy to take any two teen dramas and compare similar tropes in them, or any two TV shows for that matter, the reason I'm focusing on these is because the comparisons are very similar. So anyway, let's start by getting into the characters. Okay, let's start with ladies first. We have Buffy Summers, the Vampire Slayer, and average teenage girl. She enjoys hanging out with her friends, and she's in love with brooding reformed vampire Angel. Now Elena, average high school girl dealing with the death of her parents, falls in love with brooding reformed vampire Stefan. The characters Buffy and Elena are actually quite different. Where Elena is usually the damsel in distress, Buffy always fights her own battles. The plots are shockingly similar though. Angel is watching over to Buffy to help her fulfill her destiny, and Stefan is just obsessed with Elena because she's a doppelganger of Catherine, his ex, aka his sire, even though sire means something different in the Vampire Diaries lore, but whatever, you know what I mean. They both creepily loom over Buffy and Elena. Angel straight up watches Buffy through her window, and Stefan has a diary, so I don't know who's more brooding and creepy. Okay, so now let's compare Angel and Stefan. To do this, I wanted to first discuss the switch in the Vampire Diaries and the soul in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Both of these concepts are pretty vague and they're not necessarily explained in depth in the TV shows, but in Buffy, when you become a vampire, you lose your soul. So you have no sense of guilt or remorse, though it's been stated that vampires can still love. So it's not necessarily exact. It's pretty much a gray area. It's still more specific than the Vampire Diaries, where vampires have this switch that they can turn on and off when they kill people so that they feel no guilt. They can pretty much turn off their emotions. So, Angel used to be a brutal killer until he was cursed with a soul, and then he spent 100 years eating rats and feeling guilty till Buffy came along or something. Okay, so basically the way that this curse works is that if Angel experiences true happiness, then he will lose his soul again, and the whole point is that he will be prevented from having any moment of true happiness. You get the point. So basically, he has sex with Buffy, experiences true happiness, loses his soul, and then goes around tormenting Buffy, her friends, her family, starts killing people again, general evil stuff, you know? I think at one point he kills Willow's fish, and then he just watches Buffy when she sleeps, just weird shit. So in the Vampire Diaries, there's a type of vampire called a Ripper, and they're more sadistic than normal vampires, even when they have their emotions turned off. So, shocker, Stefan used to be a horrible killer as well, a Ripper. And then, shocker again, he flipped his switch, turned his emotions back on, and redeemed himself. Instead of eating rats, he just, wrote in his diary a lot or something. Then, he met Elena, fell in love with her, whatever. Eventually, he switches off his emotions again, and you guessed it, goes on a killing spree, tormenting Elena, her friends, her family. The Stefan and Angel similarities are very apparent, down to oddly specific plot lines. For example, both Angel and Stefan are locked in safes and thrown into water, which is just such a weirdly specific thing to happen to two very similar characters. Like, I'm not saying that this wasn't an accident, but it's just, like, very weird. And another thing is that Angel and Stefan both try to commit suicide by staying up until sunrise, and Buffy and Elena both have to talk them out of it. It's very dramatic. I'd say it's more dramatic in Buffy, though, because Angel's being, like, haunted by the first, but that's a whole nother story, who he thinks is the ghost of Jenny, who he murdered, but anyway. Also, in Buffy, they don't have those rings. In fact, the only sunlight-proof ring was literally destroyed, but I'm getting off on a tangent. Okay, I think it's time to move on now. So they're both brooding, weird, melodramatic vampires who are permanently frowning. Now we have Damon and Spike. The sarcastic, witty bad boy falling in love with the beautiful heroine is not just specific to Buffy. The bad boy trope, in general, is pretty much everywhere. You have Jason Clary from Shadowhunters, Pacey and Joey from Dawson's Creek. I could go on for a while about the similarities between Dawson's Creek and Buffy, but I'm not going to ramble. You also have Chuck and Blair from Gossip Girl, Captain Hook and Emma from Once Upon a Time, and Veronica and Logan from Veronica Mars. The specific characters in Spike and Damon have a lot in common, though. I find it funny that these shows are so similar, to be honest, considering Buffy was supposedly created in opposition of damsel in distress type vampire love story and race crap. Also, as a side note, I find it very ironic that Joss Whedon proclaims himself some type of uber feminist when he cheated on his wife many, many, many times, and his own wife said that he's a hypocrite preaching feminist ideals. But this is a whole nother tangent I could go off on, so that's all I'll say. So, Spike and Damon both start out as bad guys. Spike more so. He tries to kill Buffy's family and the Scooby Gang on numerous occasions, while Damon is just kind of an asshole who uses his compulsion in manipulative ways. Both are disliked by the female heroine, but eventually they redeem themselves. Slowly but surely. Eventually, Damon and Elena get together since Damon redeems himself. Spike's redemption takes a little longer, but he eventually joins the Scooby Gang and falls in love with Buffy. That's pretty much where the comparisons end, other than the fact that they're both often the comedic relief. And it's most likely that if somebody was an Angel fan back in the day, they're not going to dislike Stefan because they're basically the same character. The same goes for Spike and Damon. Let's talk about the side characters a bit now. I saw a blog post comparing Oz and Tyler because they are both werewolves, but that's literally all they have in common. Caroline and Cordelia are more similar. They're both Queen Bee type characters who become more down to earth as the series goes on. You also have Bonnie and Willow. They're both witches and are both the protagonist's best friends. I've seen arguments comparing the fact that Willow is Jewish to the fact that Bonnie is black, but I really think that that's a reach, and they don't really have anything in common other than the fact that they're both witches and Buffy and Elena's friend. It could also be argued that Alaric and Giles are both teacher figures and that Dawn and Jeremy are the troublesome younger siblings, but I think those are both reaches and the comparisons don't really go far beyond teacher and sibling. Another extremely similar plot point that happens in both shows is that at one point Angel is shot with an arrow laced with poison, and the only cure is to drain the blood of a slayer. Damon also gets shot with a poison bullet, and the only cure is to drink the blood of a werewolf-vampire hybrid. Overall, while these shows are very similar in a lot of ways, in the end, they have slightly different goals for entertainment. Buffy will always be special to me, yet the Vampire Diaries will always be my guilty pleasure. And yes, I definitely dislike Angel and Stefan equally.